Hello, my friends. Today we are going to be talking about how to create an underwater light beams effect in Photoshop. So we're starting with this background image, and I've divided this image to appear as though there is an above water area and a below water area. So down here, it's just kind of blank right now, and we need to create that appearance of an underwater area. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a group, and we're going to call that underwater. And now I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, and I'm going to hit M to grab my marquee tool. And I'm just going to select just the underwater area. And then I'm going to come back over here and click the Add Layer Mask button so that we now have a layer mask on our group. And this will make it so that any adjustments that we make within this group will only apply to this underwater area, which is exactly what we want. So we're going to begin by creating just a little bit of atmosphere down here before we get into the light beams, because this will just enhance the overall appearance of the light beam effect. So let's go ahead and add a new layer, and I'm going to get my brush, and then I'm going to go in here and I am going to select a cloud brush, or actually I think like an atmosphere brush. Yeah, here we go. So I'm going to use that one. So if you don't have something like this, you can create your own cloud brush. And if you don't know how to do that, I do have another video where I talk about that. So I'll put a link to that below. And you can also download cloud brushes for free online. So if you Google that, you should be able to find some free ones to download. So the one that I'm using is specifically an atmosphere brush, but just a general cloud brush would work as well. So we're going to go into the brush settings here, and we'll start with the brush tip shape with the spacing. So right now, this is how it looks. And as you make these changes, you can see that this changes to show you the difference in the brush and how the brush will behave. So I want to keep it about where it was. So this is 14% spacing. And then I'm going to go into the scattering. So I want to click both axes for my scattering, and I want to bring it up maybe just a tiny bit, maybe right about there, not too much. So that should be great to start. We'll go ahead and commit to that. And then I'm going to hit the right bracket key to make my brush larger. So the right and left bracket keys will change the size of your brush. And I want to get it pretty big. So I think that's about as big as I can go on this one. And then up here on the flow, I want to reduce my flow. So you can do that with the slider here. You can also do it using the number keys on your keyboard. So if you hold Shift and hit 2, that'll give us a flow of 20%, which is exactly what I want. I want to make sure that I have my default colors selected here, and then I'm using white. So if you don't have your default colors, you can hit D, and then you can hit X to toggle back and forth between those. So we're starting with just a white brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of start tapping some atmosphere into this underwater area that we have here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. One thing that I'm noticing is that there's kind of a spot here that got a little bit too bright, a little bit brighter than the rest. I'm gonna add just a little bit more. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit E for my erase tool. And I actually already have this set to the atmosphere brush, but typically when you go to your eraser, it's gonna probably be set to like just a regular soft round brush like this. So what you can do is you can just change the brush for your eraser to your atmosphere brush. And what this will do is it will just make it so that as it erases, we don't lose that appearance of the edges from this atmosphere or cloud brush that we're using. So I'm going to keep the flow at 20% here. I'm going to make the brush a bit smaller by hitting the left bracket key, and I'm just going to kind of come in here and tap that down. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bigger again so that this area isn't quite so much brighter as the rest. Okay, so that looks better. Now we are going to add another layer, and I'm going to go back to my brush, so I'm going to hit B. And for this one, I think I'll keep the settings about the same, but I'm going to reduce the size of the brush just a little bit. And we will continue to just paint a few more clouds in here, just to really give it that because when you're in an underwater area, there's often this kind of cloudy look to the water, particularly if there's light filtering through it. So that's kind of the effect we're creating here. Okay, so I think this is looking pretty good. So now it's a little too much, right? We don't want it to be quite so intense. So I'm going to turn off this layer for a moment. We'll go back to our first layer. I'm going to hit V to make sure I have my move tool selected, and I'm going to change the opacity. So I can do that with the slider here, and I can also do that by hitting the number keys on my keyboard. So as long as I have my move tool active and the layer that I want to work on selected, if I just hit 5, that'll give me 50%. If I hit 6, it'll give me 60, 9 will give me 90, and so on. So I think we want to go down a bit here. Maybe 60% would be good. And actually, I still think that this needs to come down a little bit. So let's hit E again for our eraser tool and make that a little bigger and see if we can't continue to kind of tap that out just a little bit. Okay, that's better. So I'm hitting V to go back to my move tool, and now I'm going to turn this layer back on, and we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to lower the opacity. So 50 looks pretty good, actually. Let's go with 40. Okay, so now we have a little bit of cloudy atmosphere. So I'm going to, I have this layer selected. I'm going to hold Shift and select the layer below it. I'm going to hit Command G to group those, and I'm going to call this atmosphere. Okay, so now let's get started on our actual light beams. So let's add a new layer, and we're going to hit P to get our pen tool. So as you can see, the lighting source here is creating like a spotlight on the surface of the water here. So there should be some fairly bright light beams kind of directly below where the light is hitting the water, but they're also going to spread out throughout the frame. They'll just be a little less intense on the edges. So we're just going to start with creating some beams here in the center. So I'm just going to create a point right about there, and one here. So this will be our first beam. And then I'm going to hit B to get my brush, and I want to go in here and go back to just a regular soft round brush. So just a totally regular standard soft round brush is fine for this, and I want to make it a lot smaller. So I probably don't want to make it, this is 150 pixels. I probably don't want it really more than around 125 pixels. I'm actually going to make it a little smaller to start, so we'll go with 90 pixels. And then I want to make sure that I have a white brush, so I have my default colors here and I've got it set to white. So now let's set the flow. So for the flow, I want to keep the opacity at 100%. And for the flow, I'm going to set it to 50%. So I'm going to hold Shift and hit 5. And now I'm going to go into my paths panel, and I'm going to hit this button that looks like the outline of a circle. And what that does is it strokes your path with whatever the brush settings are that you currently have. So now we have our first beam of light. So I'm going to hit P, and I'm going to make just one more here. So I don't want to stray too far. I kind of want to keep them in the same area. And we'll just make another one. like this. And this one, maybe I'll make it just a tiny bit bigger and we'll stroke the path. Okay, so now we want to blur these. So I'm gonna go up here to Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. So if yours is set to spin, you want to change that to zoom. So zoom is the setting we want. And what happens here is you have this little center point for your blur that you'll want to move around to a location that is about central to these beams that you've just created. So somewhere around here would make sense, and we just kind of have to guess as we're dragging this around about where it seems like that would sit in our frame. So in this image, we're a little higher than dead center vertically, so we're just going to bring that up, but we're fairly well centered horizontally, so we'll stick it right about there. And then for the amount, this is kind of just going to be a bit of guessing, and you may have to go back and forth a few times until you find an effect that you like. But I think we're going to start maybe around here at 65 is the amount, and click OK. Okay, so I think that worked just fine. We might be able to actually pump the amount up on that one a little bit, but what I'll do instead is I'll just go up here to Filter, and I'll just repeat that filter by clicking this first option here. So this is just going to repeat the exact same settings that you just used. And then I'm going to do that one more time, but this time I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut. So if I hold Control Command F, it'll do the same thing and just repeat the exact same filter I just applied with the exact same settings. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to change the blend mode here. I think we're going to go with overlay, and I think I'm going to hit Command J to build that up a little bit. And then for this one, I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit. So I'm going to hit V for my move tool, and I'm going to hit 5 for 50%. So now let's add a new layer, and we're just going to keep repeating this. So I'm going to hit P, and I'm just going to add another beam over here on this side. So let's go ahead and select a couple of points, hit B for our brush. I'm going to make the brush a bit smaller this time. Go into the paths and stroke that path. So let's go ahead and go back over here and apply our filter. So we'll go to Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. We want to change our settings, so we don't want to just totally repeat that filter, because now our beam is a little further to the right. So we kind of want to move this central point over a little bit. And I think I'm going to change the amount. Let's make it a little more. So we'll go 72 and click OK. And then we'll just repeat that as we did before. For this one, let's see, what about soft light? I think soft light looks pretty good. And then I'm going to hit J, and I think that's fine. Now let's add another layer. And again, we're going to get our pen tool, and this time I'm going to make one on this other side here. So let's put one about here. Make it a little bit thicker. And then let's add an additional one, but keep it fairly close to this one. Let's do it here. And then hit B for our brush, and we'll make that one a little smaller. And then we'll again go to Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. I'm going to drag this a little more to the left. And let's bump up the amount even more and click OK. That was a little bit too much. I don't want it to kind of spread out so much just yet. So let's hit Z, and we'll go back in there and change our settings. I think maybe I moved this point a little too far. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit. And then we'll bump down the amount just a touch. Okay, that's better. And for that one, let's go ahead and do it like one more time. Okay, perfect. So let's maybe do overlay for that and then just hit J. Actually, I think I'm gonna do soft light. And you can actually, change it on, since I duplicated that on each layer, but I think I'm gonna make them both soft light. Okay, so now that we've done that, now let's just kind of freehand brush some more of these beams in. So I'm gonna grab another layer, and I still have my brush, but now I'm just using my pen tablet to freehand some beams in here. So let's start with the brush at about 70 pixels, and let's create some here. And you can kind of change the size as you go if you'd like, to just create a little bit of variation. And I think I'm gonna do one kind of a center area here. And if you do something that you kind of don't like, you can just undo it by hitting Command Z. And let's do one more over here. Okay, so let's go with that. So this one is spread out a lot more across our image here. So we're gonna go to Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. I want to kind of keep it dead center, since that'll be the central point for this entire kind of area that we painted here. And I think that's probably pretty good. And we'll keep the amount about the same and click OK. And then we'll just repeat that a couple of times. Looks pretty good. So this is what we're going to just continue doing, is just building up this light beam effect, and I kind of drawing it all the way across the entire frame. Okay, so we now have a pretty good light beam effect going here. We just need to make some final adjustments. So I'm going to group all of these layers. So I've got my top layer selected. I'm gonna hold Shift and click the bottom one and hit Command G to group those. And we'll call it light beams. And I'm going to add a layer mask on here. So I kind of want to darken them out towards the bottom of our frame. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. I'm going to hit G to get my gradient tool. I want to make sure that I have this gradient, which is the foreground to transparent gradient, and click OK. And then I want to hit X so that black is my foreground. So now I'm just going to hold Shift and pull this up. And that just makes it so that the beams fade out towards the bottom. Let's maybe make that a little more extreme. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to pull the line up a little higher. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. And now I kind of want to brush out some of the sides just to lighten them a bit. So I'm going to get my brush. I'm gonna make it bigger. I'm gonna hold Shift and hit 2 for 20%, or maybe I'll go 10%. So let's hold Shift and hit 1 for 10% on my flow. I've already got black selected, and I'm just going to kind of lightly brush some of this out on the sides so that it's not quite so intense there. So that they're just a little more focused towards the center area here. Okay, and I think that's looking pretty good. Now I want to just kind of darken the bottom of the frame in general. So I'm going to add another layer here, and I'm going to hit my G for my gradient tool. And I'm just going to use that same gradient of black to transparent and do the same thing here. Maybe that's a bit much. That looks better. Let's do it one more time. Maybe like that. Let's set it to darken, and let's lower the opacity just a bit to like 80%. Okay, so we're pretty close to having our light beam effect here. I just want to, there's actually, I feel like there needs to be a few more beams here on the side. So I'm going to add a few more. Okay, so there we go. I think our beams are looking really good. Our atmosphere is looking good. So let's just put our finishing touches on this. So the last thing that I'm going to do is add a texture to this. So I'm just going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to choose my stars texture. So this is actually, I believe, like a Hubble telescope photograph, and I've just made it black and white. And I'm just going to paste it in here. We're going to zoom out a bit. I'm going to hit Command T, and I'm holding Shift so that it will snap this to 90 degrees as I turn it. And then we'll just put that down on the bottom, and we're just going to make it so that it will fit this area. Okay, so that looks good right there. So now I'm going to change my blend mode to overlay, and then I'm going to, let's zoom back in so we can see that, and we'll change the opacity. We're just going to kind of drag it down here. And I think right about here is looking pretty good. So what that does, I'll just zoom in, is it creates this effect of sort of like dust particles floating in the water, which you would definitely be able to see when there's light shining through the water. But I like the fact that it has this kind of interesting, extra kind of like slightly surreal element of those little dust particles looking sort of like stars. So that's why I decided to use that texture for my dust particles. So there we have it. We have our underwater light beams effect, and this can be used for all sorts of purposes in your composite imagery. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to leave those in the comments. And also, if you have any suggestions of future topics that you would like to hear me cover, please feel free to comment about those as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.